welcome to the Intuitively Wild podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Levine. Living intuitively wild is about coming back home to ourselves. Here we talk about how to live connected to ourselves, others, and nature, and make a commitment to radical authenticity, vulnerability, and acceptance. On this podcast, we delve into a wide range of topics that span the human experience. We peel back the layers and talk about the things that are often not talked about. This is a space for us all to walk and wander this path of life together. Let's dig into our roots and go deep. Hello, welcome back to the Intuitively Wild podcast. I am really excited about today's episode. It is with two of my friends, Kristin and Daisy. I was connected with them very kismetly through social media recently, actually. I won't go into the whole story, but I feel like I've known them both for years. Kristin and I talk all the time, and it's a really nice reminder that social media has its benefits. But we have a really fun and deep conversation, lots of laughter, lots of existential thoughts. And we just approach a wide range of topics that can be heavy with a lightness and a comfortability and vulnerability, and with authenticity, which are all core components of this conversation. So I hope you enjoy. So I am joined today on the podcast with two of my friends, Daisy and Kristin, and I was on their podcast recently, so you should definitely go listen to that. But I'm so excited to have them here and start by having them kind of go into what their podcast is about and why you guys decided to start it and anything else about yourselves that you want to share.
So I'm Kristin, and I co-host the Seed podcast with Daisy. And what is our podcast even about? I think this is like one of the things Daisy and I have been trying to maybe hone in on a little bit more, but also let breathe, because one of the most unique things about what we come together and create is that there really is not a lot of planning outside of showing up to the structure and the space that we've created within the Seed podcast. And we come together each week one-on-one, her and I, or with a guest like Rachel, you've been on with us before, and we get to just see what is coming up in my life, her life, usually both our lives, and how do we process that? How do we live our life? How do we show up authentically as we're navigating being a human?
Yeah, you described that perfectly. It definitely is just a space where we show up with everything that's going on with us. And I think that's part of what makes it feel so fun and authentic for us too. It feels like such a creative process whenever we create a podcast episode, because we never know what is going to come out when we start recording. And it's almost like when me and Kristin join together and put our thoughts together, it always creates something that we are so proud of. And that's actually part of, just to answer the other question you had of like why we even started this podcast in the first place, like that has always been how me and Kristin's conversations have gone. We will be sending each other voice notes or texting, and somehow we end up in the depths of some like topic and it could have started from something so tiny or minuscule, and we walk away from conversations together, and we always have feeling like, oh wow, I feel like I learned something, or I feel closer to myself, or I feel like I understand something more. And we always joked about starting a podcast just based on those conversations, and we decided this past year to just actually do it. And I'm so glad that we have, because truly every time we record, we walk away from it like, wow, that was such an amazing episode. We're always like on this high after, and it just like feels really good and authentic for us to do.
With that too, I want to add that again, coming from this place of like their structure, right? Because we've created an actual podcast, so we have this place to put these conversations, but Daisy and I have thought about this and joked around, as we all do with our like close friends, like we should start a podcast and whatever. And earlier this year, I don't know exactly what was said, but I remember a conversation where I was like, I would totally do it right now if it wasn't for the editing. And Daisy was like, "Are you kidding? I'll edit it." And then we were like, "Cool, let's record Sunday." Like, and that was it. We just started.
Yeah, that's actually so true that I don't know what it was. Like we were limiting ourselves and not
Yes.
sooner, but I also feel like we started it at the perfect time. And it was so natural in the sense that like wherever I fell short, Kristin made up for it. Wherever Kristin fell short, I made up for it. Like the social media stuff, I'm horrendous at. Like ask Kristin. I tried making a couple Canva posts when we first started this, and she was like, "These are disgusting, Daisy."
Forgot about that. I was like, maybe tweet
And I was
it
like,
here.
"Cool. That's your thing. Like you're great at it. You got that. I'll do the editing. Like I'll do like the behind the scenes stuff." And like we just make such a good team in this capacity where like we really do balance each other out for this to work. So
That's so funny. I wonder if we could find your posts.
I know
don't
you need to send them to me and I can post them when I release it.
actually that'd be so funny. If we have them, we will
That's
send
what
them
I'm
to
saying.
you.
Yeah, I'm gonna go look in our Canva and see because
They will be
forgot about
ugly. I don't know. I can't make Instagram Canva posts. They're horrible. The colors I choose, everything. Why did I do that?
It's actually so funny looking back on it now. I'm so glad you brought that up. I forgot about that.
But I love that so much. And for me, obviously, it just makes me want to do a relationship chart for human design. Like you can put two charts on top of each other and see what your chart is together. So I definitely want to do that. But I think it just speaks to the fact that we're all interested and good at and drawn to different things. And if we can honor what we want to do and be honest about like what we want to do and what we don't want to do, we leave space for another person to do what they want to do. Like if Kristin had kept trying to do the editing and like not spoken up about not wanting to do it, Daisy wouldn't have had the space to jump in and be like, this is actually, I'm fine with doing that. So I think it's just speaks to being authentic and open and communicating with each other.
100%, 100%. And Daisy's so good at it too. And I could not be. So, yeah.
Oh, you really gassed me up, but thank you.
Okay, so I would like you guys to share a bit about how you first met.
So we met at a job that we had before. We were both dietitians. So I don't know if anybody who's listening has never heard of us before. Me and Kristin are both dietitians. We work with people who have eating disorders. And we both, before being dietitians, worked at this hospital. You know, one of those jobs that you work at to get like experience for the field that you're going into. It was nutrition related, but definitely like not something that we both saw as our, long-term jobs or anything like that. So I remember we both just like met at that job. We got along on like a coworker capacity, and then slowly just started to realize that we also bonded in other ways, just through like little conversations that we would have during our little breaks or like in passing. And we both kind of, I think, started realizing like, oh, you're into spirituality kind of the way I am, and oh, you like astrology kind of the way I am, and oh, you want to go into the same niche of nutrition that I do. And then we would get into conversations about these things, and I think just realized how much we really connect on a friend level. I would even say at this point on like a sister family level.
Yeah.
And yeah, it all just started at this shitty job that neither of us wanted to be at.
Yeah, 100%, which is like so cool how all of that happens, right? Because I think that we all can or have been told the sentiment of like, oh, like find the good in something or something of that nature, that energy. And it was a job that really was a struggle. And to have like found such an important person in my life in that position is really speaks to, I think, how being open to where you're at and like, yeah, maybe it's not the best job in the world, but like look around also. I found like a sister there. Crazy. Absolutely crazy. And the fact that like that job was so odd because it again was such a not a position that one would feel like you would be recruiting for, but I got recruited to that job off of LinkedIn, and it was like a something I wasn't seeking out and responded to and showed up for. And then a couple months later, Daisy walks in the room and I was like, I like that one. Like,
I forgot that you got recruited for that job because
how weird.
I was just telling Rachel before this, like how I even ended up working there because I worked for that same hospital, but a different location. And I believe I told you this before.
Yeah.
And I remember somebody that I worked with at that location was like looking at like job listings at the other locations. And I was like, why have I never done that? Like, let me take a look, see what they got. And I saw that opening that paid more. And it was like a little bit different than what I was already doing for 2 years. So I was like, whatever, like I'll transfer over there. And so I applied for it and basically like transferred to that location doing that other job. And I remember like hating it, like you said, and feeling like, oh shit, like maybe I didn't make a good decision. But I think that all goes to show, like you said, that like even when something feels like it sucks or it's unaligned with you, like it could be working for like the greater good behind the scenes. And so interesting how both of us, to tie in like human design, are manifesting generators, and it feels like we both had this like response to work at this job. Where like you responded to a recruiter that like found you.
Yeah, I thought it was fake. It was so weird.
And like
I was like, this is a scam, but then it wasn't.
Right. And on my end, it was sort of like a response to like somebody in my like that I was working with who was like, oh yeah, like I'm taking a look at like the job boards, and that like sparked something in me like, oh, I've never done that before, let me take a look. And then like it led to this, and just wow, I don't know.
And I was going to exactly bring up the human design piece because for those who are curious, they are both manifesting generators. Kristin's a 3-5, Daisy's a 4-6. And it definitely highlights so clearly that you respond and to what's put in your path, and you don't always know why you're responding or how that will impact your life, especially for manifesting generators. And it just comes together and you don't know what piece of it will be important, but you figure it out in the end. And something I really also wanted to circle back to is the fact that you are both eating disorder dietitians. And when I found that out, it was significant to me because, as most people know, I'm in recovery for an eating disorder, and it's been a huge part of my life. So I'm really curious how you both decided that that was the line of work you wanted to do.
For me, it actually started years actually prior to my interest even in nutrition. My undergraduate was in psychology, and I just picked it because I enjoyed it. No one really guided me that you need to like go to school and continue your education after your undergraduate degree to use and really apply psychology. So I was taking a lot of classes and found an interest in the eating disorder realm from a therapeutic standpoint. I thought that was interesting. But then I graduated. I couldn't foresee myself going back to school at that point in time. And so I took time off, tried to find other jobs. And in that kind of space, started going to the gym and really had a disordered relationship with movement at the time. I didn't know it. But then I started to think, oh, well, why don't I learn more about nutrition? And I found it to be really interesting. So I went back to school for that to be a dietitian, still knowing that I had an interest in eating disorders and thought maybe I could weave that in. Who knows? Wasn't really committed to it. until I recognized my own struggles with, again, that disordered relationship with movement and body and tracking and all of that stuff. And it wasn't until I then learned about intuitive eating and health at every size that it all kind of was like blown up in my face, basically. Like, wait a second, what I'm doing is not necessarily healthy. And I see this kind of new way of thinking. This makes so much sense. And I already, again, had that kind of affinity towards that area. So it just all, again, I didn't know why, but that seems to be the story with my life. I don't know why the things are happening, but they're all being orchestrated and getting me to where I am now.
And my experience too is very similar to kind of what Kristin described as well.
Of course.
Where I, because if, I don't know, me and Kristin's lives parallel in many, many different ways. There's of course big differences, but so many of our experiences were like, oh my God, same, like I relate, blah, 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 whatever. But so same here. I actually started college as like an accounting major though, but I never graduated with an accounting degree. I after like my freshman year, I was like, this sucks. Like, this is not for me at all. I hated everything about it. I was like, I don't want to fucking keep like crunching numbers all day long for the rest of my life. And so I had like this moment of like, well, what the hell am I interested in? And at the time, I very much was also in a cycle of disordered eating and a disordered relationship with movement. Very much used like compensatory, exercise after, I don't want to get into details, whatever. We don't have to get into the details of it. But at the time though, I was like, oh, I love nutrition. I love the gym. I love all of that. And so I approached it from maybe like not such a good standpoint of like why I wanted to enter that field. So I entered the field anyway, changed my major, whatever, started learning more and more about nutrition. At some point in college, I ended up with like a knee injury. I tore my meniscus and I was no longer able to do that type of exercise to the extent that I was doing before. And that was kind of like troubling to me. And I also noticed like a change in my eating patterns at that time. And I think the more I learned about nutrition during college too, I started to recognize that like my patterns were quite disordered. And that kind of just turned into me wanting to learn more and more about that and eventually go into that niche as a dietitian and help people to heal their disordered relationships with food, body, movement, all of that too. So very similar to what Kristin described.
Wow. I feel that I've heard so many eating disorder dietitians talk about how their own journey brought them to that realm. And it started with them just getting into nutrition and not seeing that what they were doing was also disordered, and then having this whole shift and realization. So it's definitely something I've heard before. And I think it brings a whole new layer to it to have that experience and to have had that transition within yourself. It's kind of like one day you realize something and the glasses are taken off and you see the world in a whole new way.
Yes.
What have been some key takeaways that you've learned while working with eating disorders, or anything that with food and body image that has really impacted your life?
I think for me, if I think about when I'm working with patients, and then I'll go back to what I've taken myself. When I'm working with patients or clients that are struggling with an eating disorder or disordered eating, what I find to be the most important thing is meeting someone where they're at and doing so without any judgment at all. And it creates this space where that person can then feel comfortable being vulnerable and showing up authentically, because this is really hard stuff that we're talking about. It's never about food and body. It's a whole other layer deeper. And that's kind of like the language and the tool that we're using to navigate this feeling of love and safety and worth and all of that. And creating that space and letting someone know, like, hey, you can tell me whatever you're going to tell me, and I will sit here and hold it and hopefully work your treatment into a way that fits you as an individual rather than just having a cookie cutter approach. I found that to be so, so important. And then for myself, what helps me and then what I like to really bring into my work is body neutrality, just not attaching any worth to my body. And that's hard, so, so hard, because you can go in either direction with that. But I say this all the time, like, if my worth, and I remind people of this too, if my worth or your worth is attached to something that will always change, that is designed to change, even if we don't think about size, we think about aging, we think about just how you might want to express yourself, all of that is always going to change. We can't hinge our self-worth on something that is outside of our control and designed to be different. So how can we cultivate our sense of self-worth elsewhere and keep our body neutral from that?
That is so powerful and so important to remember. And from someone who's been on the other end of it, I can really emphasize the fact that having a dietitian who meets you where you're at and doesn't expect you to follow the path that, like, this is how you're covered. This is what, for me, when I was in treatment, it's like, this is what insurance is expecting. This is what you're supposed to do. And that was so detrimental for me. And when I was able to work with, and still now my dietitian to this day, when they're able to meet me where I'm at, that was the whole shift for me.
Yeah, well, thank you first of all for, sharing your take on it. Like, it's really interesting to have like your perspective added in here too. And I think Kristin touched on a lot of really, really important points. And I think what I would want to add is also, like, a lot of times eating disorders don't look the way that people think they do, which is a big reason why a lot of people don't seek help or don't think they're worthy of help. And that was something that I definitely personally struggled with. And I think it's really important to just highlight, like, if there's any kind of chaos happening in the brain surrounding eating, surrounding bodies, surrounding like what that relationship is like for you, you are deserving of support and help. And like, it's totally valid to reach out to support and help at any point when that starts happening. Because I don't think actually, I know that like eating disorders there's this stigma around like not feeling sick enough in the eating disorder space and people feeling like they're not deserving of getting that help. And I think like a really key takeaway just for everybody listening is like, you absolutely are, no matter where you feel like you're at in that. Definitely always worthy of seeking support and getting help from someone if there's any kind of anxiety or stress or anything that you're feeling regarding that, subject.
I, again, appreciate that so much. I am like getting so heated up about this because that has been really similar to my experience, and I always, when I talk to people about treatment who have no idea about what it entails or even eating disorders, I say to them, I struggle to talk about my experience, not because I'm ashamed of having an eating disorder of what I've been through, but because I don't think people actually understand what it is, because the stereotypical picture of an eating disorder is so often far removed from the reality of the situation. And after spending so much time with so many people who have eating disorders, I could probably count on one hand the amount that fit that stereotype.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's a really important piece to highlight for people, and to emphasize that you are worthy of support no matter what, if you're having any, because not feeling sick enough is something that impacted me for years. So I'm just so grateful that you are both in this space doing this work and having this mindset around it, because that is really what we need.
Thank you.
Yeah, truly, thank you. And I, again, like, just your added like experience of like what Daisy just said of like seeing that firsthand, there's not a look. Like, that is something that and again, like, we're the three of us are like in this bubble together in like whatever capacity, however we've gotten here, but we're more well versed in the knowing of like what it looks like, what it feels like, how are we working with this. And I find that when I'm just talking about this field or my job with other people outside of it, they're just so still confused. And I forget that people don't know what we know, because we talk about it so much, or it's so relevant in our lives. I'm like, damn, like, if someone's listening right now and there's one thing they can take away, it's exactly what Rachel and Daisy just said, that like, there's not a look. You deserve to get help if you are noticing you need some kind of help.
Yeah. And if you're the person that somebody's like reaching out to for that help, just like keep in mind, no matter what you think you know about eating disorders, like, do not invalidate that person's experience, because again, there is no look, there is no way to like look at someone and be like, yeah, they're struggling or not struggling.
Yeah.
And another piece that Kristin mentioned is giving people the space to show up authentically by being non-judgmental and just allowing them to feel safe to do so. And that is really challenging. And in the world in general, it's really challenging to show up authentically. But I know that that's something all three of us are really passionate about and have worked really hard to be able to do. So I would love to know, what does authenticity mean to both of you?
So, I mean, for me, I feel like it just kind of means following what feels good and right, and not necessarily needing to like rationalize a reason behind why something feels good or right, or why you're doing something that feels good or right to you. And I know that's super like ambiguous and vague the way that I described that. And just like, how can you align yourself with the things that make you feel the way that you want your life to feel like to you?
I think that's the perfect response. And I also, it's so aligned with your human design, being a manifesting generator, and also being an emotional authority and feeling into what is right for you versus logically trying to understand what is right for you and planning it out, but instead just leaning into those emotions and that intangible knowing within you.
I love that. I love when you can tie in the human design.
My brain's like always going.
Dude, it's such a skill. I love it so much. Like, I can't even express. I don't know what.
You're about to say that's such a slay.
Oh my, I should have said that. The way Daisy just described authenticity is what I'm trying to like be okay with, actually, like showing up and not having a reason, or not always knowing the why. And so I'm like, I don't know, I'm always inspired by that. But for me, like the definition and what I'm trying to work towards with the idea of authenticity, it's been like the last like 6 months or so, is this idea that authenticity is not perfection. And I think I unconsciously was linking the two, and rather authenticity is just being whole, being wholly yourself, and having love for all parts of yourself and acceptance for all parts of yourself. And that has been a hard journey for me, and like a very important one that I feel like I feel more comfortably sitting in and sitting with right now. But I think too, what I had to kind of unpack and process was, and I'm still doing it now, so I don't even know if I'll be able to articulate it fully, but this idea that I think in a spiritual space, in a new age space, or whatever we want to call this, is authenticity is often like the more authentically you show up, then you get the rewards, you get the things that you're manifesting, you get this, and it's almost like an exchange. And for me, that tugs on a lot of religious stuff of, if I show up perfect, then I get the thing. And that's not what, for me, authenticity feels like. And I think that's why I've struggled to show up authentic in the past because I was like, oh, I have to be flawless, or I have to not feel the discomfort. I have to not see the shadowy parts of me. I have to fix and fix and fix so I can be authentic. But it's kind of like this, no, let's just take a breath. I'm whole as I am now. I don't need to be doing anything different. And then who am I right now? What am I right now? How am I showing up in the world right now? Can I love on all parts of me as I exist right now? So yeah, again, I'm still like working with this and integrating it, and I don't think that there's ever a finish line for it, just more and more depth to it, but that's my working definition.
That's so interesting. And I've struggled with perfectionism a lot as well. But for me, leaning into authenticity has really helped because it's reminded me being authentic means showing up imperfectly, and that is okay. And that is what I want to do. And instead of, I definitely think that the spiritual world can highlight this. If you show up more authentically, good things will happen. And I do think that that can leave a sour taste in my mouth. But for me, I've instead redirected it to, if I show up more authentically, instead of being rewarded externally, I'll feel more grounded internally. Like I'll feel more confident and secure and aligned within myself. And that's the feeling that authenticity gives me.
Yeah. Yes. And that, I think, again, it like comes back to, for me, my like a very intense religious Christian, for anyone listening, born again, evangelical kind of upbringing. So that's where I think unconsciously it was like flip or like interchangeable, perfection, authentic, and that's not the truth of it. It's exactly what you just said, Rachel, and what Daisy said too, of like, what feels true for you. Is it, if it's messy, if it's not, whatever it is, come as you are, like an actual come as you are.
Exactly. And I was having a conversation with Daisy the other day, and Daisy, you mentioned that the more authentic you are and the more you can get in touch with your authentic self, it opens life up more for you.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd love to know how that has shown up in your life, both of you.
I think our friendship even is a perfect example of that. Me and Kristin's friendship, for example, like we both were able to completely be ourselves around each other, and the doors that has opened up for us in terms of like the podcast, just like deepening our friendship, like things that we probably will end up doing together in the future as well, is just sums up that exact thing where like if you show up as you are, the people who are meant to be in your life are gonna join you, and you're going to be able to make magic with these people. And like through like, you know, leaning on people that feel aligned with you is like when things open up for you. So I feel like it's just this like domino effect of like attracting the right things into your life when you're fully authentically yourself and show up as you are, and then that leading to things that also just feel aligned to who you are as a result.
I feel like that was exactly how I was going to illustrate it. The first thing that comes to mind is in relationship, like showing up in that way and having creative projects open up or expand, like for myself and Daisy, and also just on, it doesn't always have to be that way. It can just be like a sense of like openness almost as well. Like the moment I got on this podcast, I've had like a day, and I got on here and I was like, I felt lighter. I feel like flowy now. I feel so much more me that I have all day up until this point. And it's because Daisy's here, Rachel's here, like we're all here. And I know that like this is a space where I can be authentic. I don't have to shapeshift or change or anything like that. And so how I'm moving through the world probably from this point and the rest of the day is going to be a lot different than what it would have been if I just had the day I had prior. So I think in that respect, it opens up a lot of things. And I've also noticed a thought the other day. Again, a lot of the stuff I'm still, as we all are, in process with, but it sounds weird to say, and I hope I can explain it effectively. But if I want to be loved or want to be received by other people, and I want to create new friendships or deepen relationships, and I want to feel that connection, if I want to be loved for being me, then I have to be me. If I am censoring myself or shape-shifting or doing whatever, that kind of is an unconscious signal to myself that I'm not like my authentic self, that I'm not really worthy of that. And I'm not letting myself be open to receiving that love for my authentic self, or just being open to anything that might come my way when I am authentic. So I think that's also just how it can open up things and has opened up things in my life.
I love that. And it's kind of like if you think of a magnet, if you're putting on a certain costume, you're attracting different things to you versus if you're being your authentic self, you're magnetizing towards you the things that are actually meant for you. And we just have to trust that. I'm curious if there are spaces you can think of or times in your life when it was really hard for you to show up authentically.
Oh yeah.
Always. Literally always.
It's a hard thing to do in general, full stop, but also I just think about like my childhood, feeling like I didn't really have a sense of like who I was or a personality for a very, very big chunk of my life. And then I think I came to like a point in my life where I was like, okay, who am I? Like, why don't I have hobbies? Why don't I have things that like when someone asks me what I like, why can I not pinpoint that? Like, who the fuck am I? And it led to me like almost creating a fake personality for myself in like my teens and like what I thought would be accepted by other people. Um and so it was really hard for me at that point in time to own certain aspects of myself, such as like how sensitive I am, for example. And I think I reached a point where I was like, why the fuck am I like pretending? Like, like, what am I even doing this for? Kind of a thing. Like, do these things actually feel good to me? Or did I just like one day decide this is like who I was because I had no idea prior because I was maybe in like fight or flight, like survival mode for like a big chunk of my life where like figuring out who I was wasn't really like a thing that like I had a chance to do. But yeah, it was very challenging at certain points in time. And I think over the years, I've recognized that, and like acknowledging that is of course the first step, and like started to lean into like how I feel in certain situations to guide me to the things that feel authentic to me versus like, that random day where I like decided I liked something random. And it's getting easier for sure, but it's still always, a struggle to show up authentically. It's vulnerable to show up authentically in every situation. So definitely not something like me and Kristin or anybody I feel like has 100% figured out, but of course it's been harder in the past because of that, because of trying to force myself into like a box of, what I thought would be desirable or likable or cool or whatever it is that I wanted to be perceived as.
Yeah, there's so much more to risk when we're showing up as ourselves and letting people actually see who we are. And if they don't like it, that's so much harder for us to handle versus if they don't like this character we created.
Oh, everything you both are saying reminds me of Gabor Mate. And I don't know, Rachel, if you're familiar with him. I know Daisy is, but it's just like he highlights so much how it makes sense that we do all of these things, especially in our younger years, that we try to like put on that costume or mask or change ourselves to get love because it's part of our human nature. And I'm literally going to tell my therapist the answer to this question because I think I just found a new answer. So I'm going to just share it now. So it's the literal first time I'm saying this out loud in this context, but I'm realizing that so when I was younger, again, grew up in a very, very religious household. Church every Sunday, Sunday school, youth group, had to do all of the things. And I also went to public school. All of the people I knew at church were in very private school, evangelical born again kind of school system. I was not. So I would have kind of two personas that I was operating within, which was the church girl at church and then the normal person, for lack of a better word, at school. And so I was always kind of not feeling like I fit in any one of those categories fully. And that also kind of is displayed within my cultural upbringing too, having a family that was, some of them spoke Spanish as their first language, very like, my mom's from Uruguay, she's an immigrant, so there's a lot of like just different cultural stuff going on within my family, and then showing up to a very white school district and having that be a little bit different. And I'm realizing too, just all of these kind of, at the time as a child, conflicting identities that I felt like, all right, when I go here, I'm this way, when I go here, I'm that way, and like fitting in all of those boxes, and then not being able to have that sense of self ever because I didn't feel like I fit in any one of those, even though I was really good at fitting in every one of those. Mm-hmm. And so I just was not really able to or really feel safe anywhere in any of them as I authentically was, because there's little bits of each of those areas that I carry with me, but it was never the stereotypical mold of any of it.
Yeah, I feel that so many of us when we're younger try to fit ourselves into these boxes to be liked and well received, and so much conditioning is put on us. And it's, if we're lucky, we start to have the awareness that how we're going about in the world isn't fully who we are authentically. Mm-hmm. And we have to start questioning who we are and what we actually like. I know I had this experience so much, especially going through recovery. I would say, oh, I don't like that. And I was like, wait, do I actually not like that? Or is that just something my eating disorder told me not to like? Is that just something that like this past version of myself told me not to like? And it can be so confusing. And sometimes it was entertaining to be like, wow, I'm really discovering who I am. And it wasn't who I thought I was.
I feel like showing up authentically too, like everything you guys are saying is making me just want to put these words to it. It feels like an act of protest sometimes too.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's radical shit to show up as yourself.
And I think it's like so badass.
The people who I am most drawn to and who I most want to, who I look up to the most, are the people who are just authentic and just confident and grounded in themselves and accept themselves fully, with all their imperfections and their insecurities and all of it.
Mm-hmm. And it really is such a radical thing to do because it doesn't feel safe at first necessarily. I would say, from, don't want to make a sweeping generalization say for everyone, but I think for 99% of people, it doesn't feel safe to show up as their authentic self, either because of a experience with family or friends or just the society we live in. Maybe you don't fit whatever intersections or molds that are kind of that you see as available for you. And so to say, no, I'm going to kind of carve my own way, or I'm going to like take pieces here and there and really honor who I am is so, so hard to do.
especially because often the more we change and start to show up authentically, the more the people around us who have known us for a long time, especially people who they themselves struggle to show up authentically, are like, what are you doing? Like, this is okay. Who are you? And it's so important to be conscious with the fact that I'm going to do this for me. And it helps you find more people, like we were talking about before, more people who are right for who you truly are.
I think too, I heard this recently on a podcast of like when you do show up authentically, that you're either like freeing people almost to do the same. Like you're inspiring them. Like you said, Rachel, you look to these people and you're like, yeah, these are the people I'm most drawn to. They have this sense of self that is allowing me to be like, I can do that too. So it's freeing in a way. And then we have the other maybe category of people, and I'm sure there's a third and a fourth and a fifth, but this other group that you're triggering their like sense of safety, because again, it can feel really safe, and it is safe in some cases when we are not showing up authentically. We know that we're going to be received a certain way. We're going to at least feel a semblance of love, even if it's authentic or not, who knows, but we feel safe when we kind of like have these covers or these masks. And so when someone else sees us take the mask off, they're like, oh, cool, I can too. Or they're like, what the fuck are you doing here? You're going rogue. You need to come back to the group. And you're triggering their very human instinct to like stay together and be together. They're like, wait, what do you mean you can do that?
It almost feels like that comes from like a place of resentment too, in some ways, of like them maybe feeling like they're able to do that.
Yep. 100%.
Absolutely. And this is something I've been actually thinking about and talking about and working on a lot in my own life, is being the person who goes first and deciding to be more vulnerable and be more authentic and be more open and all the things first, without knowing if the other person is going to meet me, and being okay with the possibility that they won't. And knowing that the people who can show up and who can meet me are my people, and they're meant to continue to stay in my lives. And the people who can't, our relationship will probably change, and that's okay. But I'm not doing it with expectations. I'm doing it for myself. And honestly, it's been so surprising and really beautiful, the people who have followed my lead and shown up more vulnerably. Some of the people I was expecting, but there are also a lot of people who I wasn't expecting, and it's been a nice surprise.
That's so brave.
I also just love that practice of like, I'm gonna go first
Mm-hmm.
and be open to the possibility that people aren't gonna meet me here. Like what a good way to practice showing up authentically. Not even allowing the opportunity to be like swayed by others, but in like whatever instance you might want to apply this to.
I'd love to know, what is something you wish you were able to talk about more, something that or a place you wish you were able to show up more authentically in your life?
Relationships with men. Hands
Hard.
down. If I'm going to be real vulnerable, that's the hardest spot it is for me to show up. I don't like showing emotion. I'm home messy attachment style, and that is definitely my hardest thing. Will I be too much, too little? How will I be received? I think I've been really lucky that I have like such beautiful friendships that like I could be myself entirely, and I'm like don't feel safe to do that when I'm pursuing like a partnership. Probably stems from not being able to do so with my parents. So it's kind of like that dynamic for me.
For me, I think it's in any dynamic where I feel like there's someone who's like an authority figure. So like let's say career is like probably a good example of that. And I always felt that way like in school too. Like it's hard for me to show up authentically in spaces where I know the person is evaluating me, kind of a thing. So I find that I always like shy away from like being myself or even sharing my thoughts, even if they might be really beneficial to the conversation or things like that. And I wish that I could just show up more authentically in those spaces and be okay with like being wrong or I don't know, anything like that or being like disagreed with in that capacity. And I don't really know what that dynamic fully comes from. It could have been related to like the parent relationship growing up in terms of like what they said was always right. I wasn't really able to like give an opinion about certain things. And so like that same authority figure dynamic plays out in like career and stuff for me.
I relate to pieces of both of those, and Daisy definitely had a similar struggle. And it makes me, there's a piece in your human design chart where you can see if you have like fear of authority. So I really want to look that up for you. But I think that both topics that you guys are talking about are so relatable and so prevalent. Honestly, I think it comes back to being brave. And I mean, off a lot of work and therapy and healing certain patterns and relationships, but the actionable step is just trying to take the baby step forward to show up more authentically as much as we can.
Mm-hmm.
Really hard.
It is really hard. And you said it in this podcast, but you had said it to me the other day, like this idea of like, I'm just going to show up as me, and like working that muscle in a sense of like an authenticity, trust yourself kind of muscle, and knowing that you can express, and I'm speaking to me, but I can express things. I can be myself, and yeah, my relationships around me might change, but like at the end of the day, it feels so much better. It feels so scary to do it, but it feels so much better to be like received for yourself than have to exhaust yourself being anything else. My God.
Mm-hmm. What is something that you guys used to feel ashamed of that you have learned to love about yourself or accept?
Definitely my emotional nature. 100%. And I know I've talked about this like a few different times. I think I even already mentioned it in this episode, but I, as a child, was a very, very emotional kid and was always told things like, you are too sensitive, like, you're too emotional. Why are you crying about this? Blah, 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 blah. And I very much, shut that off for a large piece of my life. And have started to like reconnect with it through a few different things, such as like my poetry. Like I almost find it easier to express emotion like in a written way than necessarily like a verbal way. And that was sort of, I think, my like bridge into reconnecting with emotions. And now I find it even more easy to speak about them verbally too, just like through episodes of our podcast that we've had. Like you guys can go back and listen and hear me cry on like 3 different episodes if you want. Definitely something that I'm still practicing now, but definitely was something that I felt ashamed of for a very, very long time and felt like weird for, and now am starting to realize that it's actually like kind of beautiful and like a strength of mine, in that it allows me to like not only feel my own feelings, but also just like feel the feelings of others or understand the feelings of others, or even just like create things from those feelings. Like when you feel so intensely about stuff, like that's like a space that you can create from. Like my poetry wouldn't be possible without my feelings.
That just made me happy. I don't know. I love Daisy's poetry, so that's why I'm like, oh my gosh. Like she wouldn't be able to make it without her feelings. Okay. Oh, this question is like making my brain a little bit of a puddle because I didn't expect to talk about religion this much today. But if anybody is listening that has, again, that experience in that kind of Christian upbringing, it really cultivates, and I think this is true outside of that too, for a variety of different religions, but there's so much shame just around existing. And there's, at least within the framework that I was raised in, you are born wrong. You're born a sinner. You're born with all of these different things. And for some reason, the way that my brain operated was like, okay, got it. Now what kind of thing. So I just really absorbed that. And I think that spilled into shame about the way that I see the world, a lot of just the values that I had because they weren't congruent. And then they also don't really feel like they fit other molds. So I've had shame around maybe like the intensity or that I think about things and like the degree that I feel or some of the things that I find a lot of interest in. Whether that's spiritually or relationally or whatever. But I'm trying to, and I think I started saying this to you, Daisy, a couple weeks ago about like, I feel like my brain's always thinking about like existential things or very like things that are spiritual or philosophical in nature. And for some reason, I had like a lot of shame around that. And why am I so much? Why am I always thinking about the fact that like we are just these like creatures on this rock flying through space, like, and everything that comes with that. But I think again, that is like a thought process and a patterning or way of thinking that like you can't think that way when you're in a church space because then you're questioning a lot of those values, and then not everyone in just walking around is thinking about these things, so they look at you and they're like, could you chill? And it's really hard for me to chill, so I'm trying to not have, and I've made a lot of strides and progress in releasing that shame and just being like, no, like the way I think is actually like pretty cool, and maybe it's enjoyable for me, maybe it's enjoyable for other people, maybe it can spark a conversation or spark something in another person that I didn't know it could. So I'm trying to just give myself the freedom to accept and not feel shame.
Something you both brought up when you were talking is how when you were younger or going through life, these were things that society told you were wrong and that others were different in and couldn't understand. So I really think it comes back to what we were talking about before with being different and being scared to be seen as our full selves. And so much of showing up authentically is being able to be seen for our differences and recognizing that what others see as different, what is so unique to us is our gift, is what we're here to share with the world. And often it's what we have the most shame around and what we push down the most. But when we let it bubble up and just let it pour out, it's such a core component of who we are.
Totally. Because as Kristin was talking, even I was like, but Kristin, that is like the foundation of your brilliance. Like you.
When you both were talking, I was like, these are two of the things that I love the most about you guys. Like these are two of the things that are so crucial to who you are.
That is such a beautiful sentence, Daisy. The foundation of
But I think too, like that just illustrates how the things that feel the most shame about too, like they're always, what's the term? Like a double, no, but there's like two sides to the same.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You can see them in a negative capacity, and at the same time, they are your gift, just like Rachel was saying. Like they really truly are and can be a gift. Like, and also how cool, Kristin, that you took something that you felt ashamed of growing up and literally were like, I'm just gonna broadcast it to the world through a podcast.
Yo, my mother was not happy about that one. She found the podcast. That
is like the ultimate exposure therapy.
It was no, it was the ultimate exposure therapy, because now honestly I'm just like, well, fuck it. It's out there. And like this expression of like Daisy and I coming together and showing up authentically has been so healing in what we've created. And the more we step into it, it's like we think it's gonna hurt or not feel safe, but it's actually like, no, the more authentic we are, like the more healing it is, because we're like, oh, wait, like I'm good, I'm okay, like Rachel's here, Daisy's here, the people that like can receive that and want to and are excited to will. And it's so incredibly healing.
I've had a very, very similar experience starting this podcast, putting myself out there with my business more. I mean, it's all the things. Okay, one main question left that I want to ask you guys is, we've touched on pieces of it already, but living intuitively wild means living dedicated to your true, authentic self, no matter what. So I'd love to know, what does your connection with your intuition look like, and how does that show up in your life?
I think kind of like what I said before is like really just leaning into what feels good, like seeking out more of that, what feels good.
This is like so hard for me. I don't know why. But in like a way where I just feel like I have so much to say that there just isn't words. I think for a very long time, I truly thought there was nothing within me that like would have guided me. Um, I always was taught, look outside yourself, all while still knowing and having like a whisper of something, like some kind of connection to what I would have labeled as Holy Spirit, Spirit, Universe. It's changed names throughout my life. And now kind of just like arriving at this place where like, oh wait, no, it's just me. Like it's my intuition. And now that I can see that, it's just about continuing to trust and say like, okay, when I felt this feeling, it was correct and okay. Like my intuition is trustworthy. It is so, so important. It's like a sixth sense. It's part of how I interface and interact with the world, and it's important and I can trust it. I don't know if that answers the question actually, but
No, it answers it beautifully. Thank you. Thank you both so much. I honestly could talk to you guys forever. And I'm so, so grateful that you guys came on. I think that this conversation will resonate with a lot of people, and I know it felt really powerful for me. So please share where people can find you, connect with you, listen to your podcast, any other projects or work you guys have going on, all the things.
Well, you can follow our podcast at Grow with the Seed on Instagram and TikTok, and you can listen to it anywhere that you guys listen to your podcasts. As far as my poetry book, you guys can find it on blurb.com or amazon.com. It's called Metamorphosis by DH. So it's just my initials. It's not my full name. The ME is in parentheses, so it's going to be a little.
I'll link it.
Yeah. And then Kristin, feel free to link your. Oh, I guess should we do personal Instagram accounts too?
I'm fine with it. Yeah.
Cool. If you guys want to just like follow me on my personal Instagram account, I'm at Uncle Magic.
I love that name so much.
It's so good.
The E in Uncle is a 3, and then there's an underscore between Uncle and Magic.
Rachel will link it in the show notes.
Yeah, I'll link it.
Everything's so complicated with me. I don't know. Okay, your turn, Kristin.
Mine, obviously, follow us at Grow with the Seed. Like I'm in the DMs. You can slide in. My personal one is Kristin in Space. And then I play around on Substack in a little container called Soul Remembering. And it's not, at first I thought it was going to be structured like a weekly newsletter every Thursday. And now it's just kind of like, maybe you get 2 in a row, maybe you don't get one for 2 weeks. We'll see. It's a little surprise box. So you can head over there and subscribe or just read along to whatever existential crisis I'm currently in at the moment.
Thank you guys. I, again, am so grateful for you both to have stumbled into my life and to be connecting more deeply and to have had you on the podcast. So thank you. And I will see everybody next week.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Intuitively Wild, the podcast. I hope it helped deepen your connection to yourself, sparked some insights, and inspired you to live intuitively wild. If you enjoyed this podcast, it would mean so much to me if you would share it with others and leave a rating and review. And please reach out to me. I would love to connect with you. I will see you next time for more magic.